when I first came to Ananda, I was a product of the society in which I grew up in. And that society preached basically that you should live according to that which would fulfill your own personal desires. You should live in a way that would bring what you want to you. So how that affected others wasn't really material. If you had to climb over others, knock them down, get them out of the way, that was okay. That's business, competition, the American way. But that approach to life, I found it wasn't very effective if you wanted to be happy. It was only effective if you wanted short-term gain. If you want short-term gain materially, outwardly, then yes, you can beat others down. You can cheat others. But in the long run, that never leads to happiness. I found that I lived in a society of people who weren't particularly happy. They had the things that they wanted, but they had no peace of mind. They had no personal well-being. And I myself experienced that very intensely. I was very aware that I wasn't happy. Even when I was doing things that I enjoyed doing or wanted to do, I didn't have a sense of extended well-being. And of course, eventually I read the autobiography of a yogi, and then I found Ananda Sangha and Swami Kriyananda, and a group of people that were living in a way that was very different than the way that I had brought up. And so I arrived at the Ananda meditation retreat, and I was 21 years old, and I found a group of people who had walked away from Western material success and moved out into the forest. And we're living in tents and teepees and little trailers and very small cabins, no running water, no electricity. They were using wood fires to keep warm in the winter. None of the basic creature comforts that the society that I grew up in preached as being essential for happiness. And yet I found these people in the sunshine, in the rain, in the mud, in the dust, when they didn't know how they were going to pay for their next meal, they had smiles on their faces. You could feel a well-being coming out of the very presence. They're just being around them made you feel better. Kriyanandaji was an incredibly successful student in high school and in university. He was very popular, and he was considered to be a natural for success in writing. He was a poet and thinking that he would become a playwright. And he was extremely good at intellectual debate. And his teachers some of his teachers didn't have high promise for him because he wasn't interested in what they were teaching. But when he was interested in some subject, he was very successful. As well, he was a singer. And for a period of time, he took lessons. You would hardly, I didn't even know this until after I'd known Swamiji for 30 years or more. He sang in a jazz band. He was in a band. The music of the times in which he lived. And he was a dancer. He would go out dancing with the ladies were lined up to dance with him, and they would take over the whole floor, and everybody would stand around watching them dance because he was so good at it. But while he was doing that, underneath, he was recognizing that all of these outward signs of capability and success were not the same as happiness, as fulfillment. And so his own search became very intense. And he eventually read the autobiography of a yogi. And in his case, he did something, of course, very dramatic. He got on the next day, he got on the bus, drove across the country, and many of you know the story. He came to the ashram. The first day he met Yogananda, was accepted as a disciple, and he went virtually in a week's time from being a successful university student, popular, well thought of, the son of a successful geological engineer, lived in the nice part of town. And he just walked away from that, went into the ashram, where you don't get paid anything, and you basically work all day for free. And but you're taught how to meditate. You're taught how to develop an understanding and a practice for experiencing inner happiness, inner well-being. Now, there's many aspects of the spiritual life. You can't talk about them, all of them at the same time. Today, I want to specifically focus on seva, service. Service as a path to happiness. Because many people would look from the outside at Kriyananda's experience and say, basically he was the master and they were the slaves. And they were just there to work for him for free. And in modern times, we've seen many quote-unquote spiritual leaders who aren't very spiritual and do take advantage of naive students and basically use their efforts to put money in their own pockets and to fulfill their own personal desires. But because people misuse things doesn't make them bad. People drive cars and crash them. That doesn't mean cars are bad. That means that the driver wasn't such a good driver. Some people are good cooks. Some people aren't such good cooks. So the food that they serve may be good tasting and healthy, but it may not be. It isn't the thing itself that determines, generally speaking, whether it's a positive or a negative. It's the consciousness that we bring to it. It's the way that we approach it. There's an interesting story out of the autobiography of a yogi about Sri Yukteswar. Now you have to remember that Sri Yukteswar was born free. He was an avatar. He was born liberated, but he came into this world with a particular mission, mainly which was to train Yogananda. But he was an avatar. He was one with infinite spirit. But when you come into this world, you take on a personality which has its own quirks. And so there was one day, Sri Yukteswar walked down to the Ganga, and when he got down there under the banyan tree, he saw Mahavatar Babaji. And Mahavatar Babaji, of course, he was excited. Srikteshwar was very excited to see him. And he got so excited that he said, "Sir, stay here, right? I'll come right back. I've got to go get you something. I've got to get something to give you. Seva, service. I've got to do something. This is cultural. You have to feed your guest." So before Babaji could say, 2 words, Srikteshwar had taken off to get something to give him. And when he came back, of course, Babaji had gone. And this upset Srikteshwar. He was very disappointed. And then later on, Srikteshwar was with Lahiri Mahashai, his guru, and Babaji came, but Srikteshwar couldn't see him. And Lahiri Mahashai said, "What, you can't see Babaji?" Because Lahiri Mahashai bowed to Babaji, and Srikteshwar didn't do anything. And then Lahiri Mahashai touched Srikteshwar. He could suddenly see Babaji, and he still didn't bow. And Babaji says, sweetly says, "I see you're a little bit upset." And Srikteshwar said, "Yes, sir, I'm upset. I went to get you some sweetmeats, and then you disappeared." And in essence, Babaji says, "Well, really I was there still, but you couldn't see me because you were so agitated." And then Srikteshwar went, "Oh, okay." "Yes, sir, I recognize that I became agitated." And yet, culturally, the way that we were been trained, he was doing the right thing. He was serving the guru. There's a corollary story in the Bible about, now I can't think of the names, but the one sister was working in the kitchen, the other one was sitting at Srikteshwar's feet, at Jesus' feet. And the one who was in the kitchen was thinking, she should be helping me. But Jesus said, "No, she's doing the right thing because she is attuning." Just working, just doing the business of helping other people in itself is not sufficient to understand service. When I have traveled quite a bit around India over the years, and I often go to hotels, but it's not just there. But oftentimes they'll say, "Okay, I can't help you right away. Please sit down." But particularly in hotels, they want you to sit down right away. They've been trained. You should sit. And would you like some water? Okay. But if you think about a person who's traveling, would a person who's just traveled maybe in a train or in an airport on a long plane flight and then gotten into a taxi and sat for a fair amount of time, would they really feel like sitting again? No. At least a fair percentage of the time, travelers don't necessarily want to sit. They might. So the appropriate the thing to say to that guest is, "Would you like to sit?" Not sit. You see? And from the very beginning of Ananda, we had this the sign above the reception center: "The guest is God." This comes from India. The guest is God. Would you tell God to sit? No. You'd say, "Lord, how can I serve you? What is your need? What can I do for you?" Not, "Oh, here's what you should need." And this is very common. We get into a circle of thinking that what we think they need is what they need, rather than it actually being what they need. We have to see it from that other person's point of view. And there's something that very important process that takes place when we shift from what we think to what others need, to what they think. And then on that higher level, what does God think in this moment, in this situation? Because when you think about others, are we thinking about them as personalities, or are we thinking about them as expressions of God? And who are we serving when we serve others? Are we serving that personality, that ego, or are we serving God coming through that expression? So when you come to the ashram, when you live in the ashram, you have a very different point of view of what service looks like. It's not service in the name of what I want. It's service in the name of what would please God in this moment. What does God want? And God takes into account both sides of the coin. We generally can only see one side of the coin at a time. My needs, their needs. But God sees all of the needs. And what we want to do is transcend that our side of the coin point of view. So we can see that in the educational system. As you grow through education, you start with the ABCs, and then you get words, sentences, and paragraphs, and then essays and books. You grow in this process. In the beginning, it's good just to do things for others. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's the best thing for them or not, you're still beginning to think not just of yourself. And sometimes when we come to the spiritual life, why do we come to the spiritual life? We don't come because it's going to make others happy. We come because it's going to make us happy. Yes? But the key to understanding what's going to make us happy is the recognition that we need to include others in that happiness in order for our own happiness to be successful. And then ultimately that leads to the recognition that we aren't separate from others. Initially we think that the person serving is separate from the person being served. But we recognize that no, I am serving my own self in these other forms. So we begin, and that's of course, there's stages along the way. We begin to realize that, and when I came to Ananda, this group of people clearly were not happy because they were living in teepees. They were living in teepees because they were happy. And happiness was more important than the physical place that they lived. So when we begin to, when we talk about seva, we talk about nishkam karma, desireless action. Acting without the desire for the fruits of our actions. We don't do good so that we'll get in return. We simply do good because when good flows through our consciousness, we are happier. And simultaneously, the expression of that well-being improves the quality of everything that we do. So there's a big difference between if you've ever gone to, I know in America, you go to a restaurant and the waitress comes or waiter comes and serves you. And sometimes that server is like, okay, what do you want? Okay, I'll get it. And it's like you're going, sorry to bother you. But some of them are like very friendly and, what can I do for you? And somebody who's really good, because maybe there's no ketchup, no sauce on the table. And the ones that are really good will get it there before you have to ask for it. They'll know. They'll reach out either initially with their experience, but over time, people who are really sensitive to really caring about what others need will develop a sixth sense, an intuitive sense of what needs to be done. And it'll be different for each person in each situation. So if you were really perfect at it and you were working in a hotel, when that guest came in, you'd know magically whether they were needed to sit or whether they needed to stand. But at minimum, you'd be able to say, well, which would you prefer? Or how may I help you? Rather than imposing your sense of what their need might be. And you saw this in Yoganandaji's life, when he would just spontaneously do things to meet the needs of others. And over the years with Kriyanandaji, we've seen this synchronicity. Sometimes you don't even realize it. Sometimes you're just in the right place to do the right thing spontaneously. And when we do this, when we live in this flow of God's service through our lives, then a couple of really important things are happening. One is that we forget our ego. Because when we live in our personality ego and the preferences and the desires that it has, we limit our happiness. When we live outside of that, we're free of it. It's like we're not in that prison. We're not in that limitation. We're free out here. But even more dynamically is when we don't just, for example, I've met over the years, and there's many stories, people who are basically service-oriented. They do things for others all the time. I mean, mothers do this. Mothers do things for others all the time. But that doesn't mean they're doing it freely. Most mothers have expectations of return. You have to appreciate what I'm doing for you. And you should like what I've done for you. I've given you a mango. Don't tell me that you want an apple. You should recognize that I'm doing the right thing for you. And that's not always wrong, but it's limited. If we don't recognize, over time as our children grow, they have more and more understanding about what they would prefer. And we have to attune ourselves to those preferences. But in the end, we have to recognize as parents that our service to our children should have no expectation of return. So in India, of course, you expect your children to appreciate you, and you expect your children to take care of you when you get old. I mean, this is very cultural. And that isn't necessarily a bad model, but it's a bad model if we're attached to it. It's a bad model if we enforce that on our children, if for any reason they don't want to do it. And of course, as societies change and we live more and more in this one world rather than our own little countries, our children may live in other countries, and India will have to go through great changes over the next 20, 50 years, social change. Because these patterns are changing not only in terms of the evolution of social and political life on planet Earth, but in terms of the yugas, the energy, Kali Yuga versus Dwapara Yuga. We live in a time when all of those concrete preconceptions about the way that life has to be, should be, we're seeing subtler understandings underneath, that life is much more fluid. We were talking, Guptaji and I, about last night about relationships and marriage and such, and how, things are changing. The way our understanding about, you get married and that's it for the rest of your life. And it's not like that. It's not like that in America, and it's growing to be not like that in India. And it will continue to change. We were just saying about how some people in America, they're talking about marriage contracts that have limited lengths of time. Okay, I'll sign up for 5 years. Then we'll see. Well, we could debate that, but the point is that the truths of life are underneath the things that we see on the outside. And while the principles are consistent, the manifestation of those principles changes. So the principle of serving others is constant. But the form that service takes is individual. is ever evolving according to the people involved and the times and the place. There was a time in Yoganandaji's life when he had problems with his legs and he couldn't walk and he needed help getting in and out of the car. And so one day, Kriyanandaji and I think someone else was helping him. And he said, thank you. And they said to Master, oh no, thank you. For all you do, it's so much greater than us helping you get in and out of the car. And he just, Master smiled sweetly. He said, God serving God. That's his play. God serving God. God loving God. And when we see it underneath, that's the reality. The form that it takes is secondary. So we don't want to be bound by thinking this is what our service should look like. We don't want to think, oh, this is the way I serve. I don't do that. We need to expand our horizons. At Ananda, we grew up, if you meet somebody new, you go, well, so, who are you? Or what do you do? And people are defined by, oh, I'm a plumber, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, I'm a this or I'm a that. No. I'm a devotee. I'm a soul on planet Earth aspiring to infinity. The limitation of definition is limiting. It doesn't lead to happiness, and it isn't true. We are not those things. We have been so many other things in the past. So if we're trying to break free of limitation and attune ourselves to infinite happiness, we can't think, I am happy because I'm a doctor. No, doctors aren't always happy. People who have great jobs that pay well, they're not always happy. There's no greater likelihood that they're going to be happy than poor people. In fact, there's sometimes a greater likelihood that they won't be happy. When you have all the money that you need, when you have all the possessions that you need, when you have the respect of your peers and your society thinks well of you, and you're not happy, now what are you going to do? Because none of those things by themselves will provide happiness. Only when we connect to, now there's levels of happiness. You can get job satisfaction by doing a job well. That is a form of happiness. It isn't eternal, it isn't infinite, but it is a lot better than the depression of reward and then depression because the reward is over, which is the way most people live. We live from up and then down, up and then down. So today people like me, but if they don't like me, then I'm not happy. Then the world is controlling my happiness. The opinions of others control my happiness. The child isn't happy with the mother or the father's actions. So now the parent becomes unhappy because the child's unhappy. No. We don't want anyone else to control our happiness. We don't want our happiness to be determined by how others receive our service. So if we do our best at work and the boss complains, are you going to be happy or unhappy? And this is why the teaching is, blame doesn't make me worse, praise doesn't make me better. Blame doesn't make me worse, praise doesn't make me better. Seek the truth. Did you do your best? Did you attune yourself as well as you could to the circumstances? When you've done your best, you've done your job. Feel good about that. But most importantly, the thing that I found at Ananda was not just a group of people that were living a lifestyle that they liked, but they were connecting to something that was greater than themselves. They were connecting to something that wasn't just the well-being of doing good. You know what I mean? They say goodness is its own reward. This is true, because when you do good, you're not rewarded by other people thanking you for it. You're rewarded by the fact that you feel good energy flowing through you in that moment. And that good energy is its own reward. When we serve others in harmony with positive, caring feelings, with loving service, then we are happier as a result of that energy flowing through our consciousness. But now imagine the difference between the 1 horsepower, I'm happy, the ego personality is happy because I'm doing good things for others, to a connection to infinite happiness flowing through your consciousness. There's a completely different level of awareness of happiness potential. So most people have no idea how happy they can be, because to them the happiest point they've ever had in their life was, the day that they got married, or the birth of a child, or when you're in university, or your first love. You're just so excited. That isn't happiness. Happiness is Satchidanandam, ever existing. That's eternal, ever conscious, never ending. There's no end to it. Bliss, and it's ever new. Our potential for happiness is so much greater than what we're used to experiencing. And when we're serving in the right consciousness, when we live in that consciousness, that true consciousness of seva, sevananda, bliss through service, Kriyananda's whole life, oftentimes we think of his name and we go, well, Kriya Yoga, bliss through Kriya Yoga, but Kriya means action. Bliss in action. And Swamiji's whole life was bliss in action. Taking this inner experience to the best of your ability to connect to it, and then let it flow through your life. This is a completely different view. And this is what we're trying to do as we deepen our meditation, as we deepen our ability to experience God's bliss, and God's understanding about what would be the best thing to do for everyone concerned in any given moment. And then let that flow through your life. Let yourself be in harmony with that. If you think about it, imagine, the metro system in Delhi. It's quite extensive. Think about how much time it took to build the metro system, and then imagine it being done by one person. How many we say man hours? How long would the metro system take? The initial startup was, it's a few years. And I don't know, they've been working on it for 6 or 7 years now, and they keep making it bigger. But from the very beginning to the first line running was 2 or 3 years. Imagine one person doing it. How long would that take? Really a long time. Hard to imagine how one person could do that. But then when you add all of those people together, now a lot can be accomplished. Think about this spiritually. When we try to serve on our own, we only have one person power. But when we attune ourselves to God's energy and to the family of that are serving consciously, we are connecting to a capability that literally has no limit. Because if you think about this, we were just looking at it and thinking, well, wow, one person doesn't have much power to change much. But think about the lives of the saints. One person changing the whole course of history for thousands of years to come. One person. But what was the difference between the one person trying to build a metro or the Great Wall of China or the pyramids and the one person who changed the world? Was the power of life's potential flowing through that consciousness. And this is what we want to attune to on ever deeper levels. Attune ourselves to that higher potential of happiness. And let that attunement guide our service. So that God is serving God through our lives. So that we are more intuitively able to meet the needs of others. And to recognize that we as egos aren't meeting the needs of others. That God through us is meeting the needs of others. And this is why Yoganandaji said that the people who serve the work, when I say the work is bringing the light into the world. And we have our own particular ray of that light, the path of self-realization, the masters of self-realization. We have a particular spiritual family. And when we connect to that just like when we chant Gayatri, we practice Hang Sa, we're connecting to mantras that have been chanted for thousands and thousands. We don't know really how many thousands of years that these mantras have been chanted. They're incredibly powerful. When we attune ourselves to that, it's much more powerful than, you can just make up a word or a syllable and do that, and you'll get some benefit from it. But when you attune yourself to this greater power, so much more can take place. When we attune ourselves to the power of the masters flowing through our lives, we do it consciously, then dramatic changes can take place in our consciousness. Yoganandaji said that if you give me 3 young students of any background, even the worst background, and have them practice Kriya Yoga for 3 years, I'll make saints out of them. Of course, they have to do what he says. If we were to immerse ourselves completely in this process of attunement to Spirit living through our lives, to dedicate ourselves to it more and more every day, we would be amazed. And we are. You're here. Everyone here has experienced this to some degree. But what we want to do is not be satisfied. Oh, a little bit is enough. Yeah, a little bit is incredible. Just a little bit of peace of mind through the practice of Hang Sa is incredible. But that's just the beginning. That is just the beginning. And our ability to experience the most amount of God's presence in our lives can dramatically be increased when we participate in the service of the light. And each of us in every day has an opportunity to do that. It doesn't mean that you have to be a teacher of meditation. It means that whatever you're doing, wherever you're doing it, you consciously recognize that you are a channel for the light. Whether you're serving your children, your community, your country, the world, whether you work in a shop or whatever, it doesn't matter. The difference is when you consciously recognize that God is trying to bring the light into the world through your life. And it could be as simple as offering someone water, consciously. But simultaneously recognizing that you're not going to be offended if they don't want the water. Not being attached to that service. And the more in tune we are with it, the more we will spontaneously understand what that person's needs are. And then you might see someone in your workplace you haven't talked to in a month, and you might walk up to them for some reason and go, "How are you doing?" And they'll go, "Oh, I'm really having a bad day." And you'll be able to, let's talk. You can bring some positive energy into their life. When I travel, this happens all the time. You meet people you've never met before, and you have an opportunity to share something. You never know when some beautiful opportunity will come, and you can say, "Oh, have you ever heard of Autobiography of a Yogi?" It's not like you're trying to make them on this path, but you're trying to act as a channel. And it can be just Dale Carnegie, who was a well-known motivational speaker and writer in America. He said, just to getting others to smile. Give them a compliment. Oh, your shawl looks so beautiful. Your sari is nice. Do you do something with your hair? It looks good. It looks particularly nice today. It can be as simple as just bringing a smile. He said, try to learn people's names. The most beautiful word in the language for most egotistical people is their name. If you just say their name, hi Vinesh. He knows that I know his name. He feels good about that. That's this much, but it's this much more than the way many people walk through life. Get out of my way. They don't even look at the people they want to get out of their way. They just push them aside. This doesn't lead to happiness. So recognize that when we are meditating, when we're chanting, all of the sadhana that we do has to be exercised. That state of connectedness that we come to through those practices has to be brought out into daily life. And this is when we are, we practice ahimsa, but we could call ourselves soldiers for the light. We recognize the power of an army. We recognize the power of group energy, a spiritual family. And in the song I sang earlier, shots not of anger, joy will be our gun. Bring that joy. Bring God's enthusiasm and ever new joy and ever new spontaneous caring into the world. Channel it consciously. That's your service. And the more you connect that service to the light and not just trying to do good deed every day so that you get good karma in a future incarnation. That's not nishkam karma. Because that's thinking, I'm going to do good, I'm going to get good. No, just live with this good, positive, caring flowing through your life. This leads to freedom from ego consciousness. So, let us serve more consciously. Let us seek every day to be conscious channels. When we pray, we pray, may thy love shine forever, and may we awaken that love in all hearts. We don't think just, I want to be awakened into God. We want to share that light with others. So experiment with this. Live consciously as a representative of the light, and ask the masters to live through you and to share their love, their joy, their understanding through your life, and see what happiness that can bring in your own awareness.